was in fact the emperor, did he really, while he was the head of state, did he truly have any authority to push the ship of state, guide it, to make decisions in one way or another? And by and large, and there's a great debate about this, as to how influential or at all the emperor was in pressing decision-making during the 1920s, well, 30s and 40s during the war. In 1945, though, he does apparently overrule the War Council, says we must suffer the insufferable and bear the unbearable. We resign, we surrender. And then, despite the call for unconditional surrender, up to that point, the United States decides under the occupation authorities, John MacArthur, to keep him as a symbol of the state. So now what you had was Akihito, the current emperor's father, Hirohito, being the emperor, continuing in power, and being a symbol of the state, though, with officially no political duties and political power whatsoever. He died in 1989. Akihito becomes the emperor. And
he died without abdicating.
That's
the way you're supposed to leave that office.
There is no provision for abdication.
And stay there till you die.
Exactly. My guess as well is that to the degree that, and I'm speculating, we all would be speculating, no one would get in Hirohito's head, the degree to which he would see himself as the rightful leader of the state, and without having a democratic root such that he would ever think that the state, that there would be any abdication. He embodies all of the authority, the symbolism, and thus he is either the emperor or he's not, or he's dead. I think Akihito was raised in a very, very different cultural context, and consequently is prepared to think of the emperor as an institution, a political institution that exists with the state and is not necessarily embodied in his own life. And so that raises so many of the questions that he has, the conversation that he's pushed today, or recently, with this announcement that he wants to perhaps retire.
Yeah, perhaps. It didn't actually retire. He only said he might.
Of course, well, there's no mechanism for him to do so. He cannot actually step down.
He's waiting on Abe, isn't it?
Well,
to run something through the legislature.
And that's where this becomes very, very interesting, because Prime Minister Abe has said repeatedly that he dreams of constitutional revision. That is his great ambition as a politician, would be to rewrite the constitution that was forced upon the Japanese in the aftermath of World War II.
Has it been rewritten at all since?
Never amended.
So it's still inviolate from 1945 or the...
6-7,
whatever.
Right, but, and there is a debate about where, while the Americans gave them the draft, to what degree did that represent Japanese ideas and what Japanese input existed. But yes, it has never been touched. And I mean, most people that wrote the Constitution, certainly those that pushed it on the Japanese from the American authorities, never expected it to survive as long as it did. So the debate in Japan today is, in the main, and see, this is, we need to be careful because it's very easy to oversimplify what's going on here. Because as most people focus on the constitutional debate, as far as they're concerned, it's only about Article 9, which is the war renouncing clause that says in sentence 1 that the Japanese will abjure the use of force as an instrument of state power. In other words, that they will never wage war to solve international disputes. And the second one is to preserve that, the Japanese will never have the instruments of war, meaning they won't have a military. No, it's nonsense, because they have it. They don't have an army, a navy, an air force. They have a ground self-defense force. They have a maritime self-defense force. They have an air self-defense force. And this is a, it's sleight of hand. I mean, it's rhetoric. Yeah. The Japanese have, by some measures, the 4th largest military in the world. It's incredibly modern, incredibly capable. But the Japanese people take this very, very seriously. Now, for conservatives like Prime Minister Abe, this notion of giving up war, of giving up a military machine, is essentially emasculating. For them, that is the denial of the essence of who the Japanese are. And there is a certain macho militaristic ethic in this. There is a notion that Japan, as a modern state, needs to be able to make contributions to regional and international security that are commensurate with its status as the world's 3rd largest economy, and a country that has enjoyed significantly the benefits of peace and stability and should give more. And then, as an ally of the United States and partner, we, the Japanese, should be able to more fairly and equitably distribute the burdens of that partnership. And so Abe et al., and there's a lot of folks behind him, that would seek to amend the Constitution, mostly to focus on Article 9. And every year, right now we're in a moment, a sort of a certain flux, where the Japanese are talking about that constitutional amendment. In fact, constitutional amendment represents a far, far greater expanse of issues than just this question of Article 9. Some people would suggest that we actually, in fact, need a constitutional amendment that changes the status of the emperor, symbol of the state with no absolute power, unable to abdicate, can only be a man. Maybe we should change those things. Some people want to talk about personal rights and personal protection. Some people want to talk about women's rights. Some people want to talk about environmental protection. So
It's Pandora's box. You open it up, and maybe what he said was, I'd like to abdicate, or in not the same words, I'd like to abdicate, but I'm going to need, I'm going to need approval. I'm going to need a change to the Constitution. And maybe in there somewhere is saying, maybe we should start a change process that will cover other issues.
actually, I would argue my guess, and this is merely a guess, is maybe it's just the opposite. See, you're not thinking this through, Jay. But I mean,
We don't always agree. I want to make that clear.
the difference though is I'm usually right.
And so much so that we're going to take a break right now so we can regroup and maybe negotiate something in the next minute. We'll be right back.
Welcome to ThinkTechHawaii.com. This is Johnson Choi, your host. My focus is Asia in Review. We talk about interesting subjects in Asia. Be sure to check the ThinkTech.com website on the next topic. Thank you.
Aloha, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, host of Sustainable Hawaii. Every Tuesday at noon, we talk about issues important to Hawaii's sustainability, the issues of conservation, renewable energy, land management, food and energy security, and other issues that are extremely important as the World Conservation Congress approaches in the first week of September, and next year's World Youth Congress that's taking place here that's focusing on sustainability as well. Please tune in, join us as we highlight all the good things that are happening to achieve sustainability in Hawaii. Mahalo.
Lawyer. We are right back. That was fast. And we were unable to negotiate anything. But still, I feel we ought to hear what Brad has to say about this important issue.
We weren't even negotiating. I think we were just making fun of each other. It's a pity you don't have this live. So sorry, where was I? You will see a number of surveys, invariably, particularly on Constitution Day, which is in early May in Japan, where all the newspapers ask, do surveys of do you favor change of the Constitution? And typically, it's in the low 40s to high 40s range in favor. So there's no majority. Every now and then you get a survey that suggests there's a majority in favor of constitutional reform. But the tricky bit here is constitutional reform could mean any of those basket of issues that I mentioned. So there's no guarantee that, in fact, what you're looking for is an Article 9 change that the conservatives would be backing. My sense of what the emperor is doing right now is, I think he's genuinely concerned about his health, about the ability to safeguard the institution. There are indications, and to go beyond that I think is bold and perhaps overstates the point. And you need to be very careful. The people that protect the institution and respect the institution of the imperial household in Japan are very, very touchy. So it's really, really hard to talk about this with a lot of certainty. But there's speculation that what in fact the emperor is concerned about is precisely the conservative drift of the current government in Japan. And that by opening up the question of the role of the emperor, what you do is you shift the debate away from the question of Article 9 reform. And that what you force the government to do is to spend political capital, time, resources, et cetera, on a political debate that moves away from the constitutional reforms that might, in fact, trouble this emperor. It's hard for me. I certainly don't I don't know what he thinks, but like I said, there are a number of episodes in the last 20, 30 years, and even more recently, that suggest the emperor is very much wedded to the current constitutional order in Japan, and very much troubled or somewhat concerned, let's just say.
Have we seen that before? Because he's been living in a bubble, as you say. He's not permitted by law to make political statements,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess that's why he couldn't say, I want to abdicate, because that's a political statement. Query Does he follow it? Does he have telephone calls with Mr. Abe? Does he really engage at some other level, some maybe quiet backroom level with the politics in Japan?
I mean, again, I'm speculating. And what I've read about, I mean, there are interesting indicators of how the emperor and the imperial family reacts to certain things. So, for example, one of the most contentious elements of Japanese policy in regard to the history and the way that history is considered is the Yasukuni Shrine, as you well know. And Yasukuni is where the souls of all of the people who fought on behalf of Japan are enshrined. It's not a cemetery. It is literally, and it's not as if there are urns of cremated bodies, but literally the souls are interred there. So
Very symbolic.
Right, it's extremely symbolic. In 1978, one of the most contentious issues regarding the significance of Yasukuni is the fact that the 14 individuals that were convicted of Class A war crimes and put to death by the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, their souls too were interred in Yasukuni in 1978. And it was done surreptitiously. The chief priest of Yasukuni, apparently in a nighttime secret ceremony, brought them in, did whatever was done to inter them, and went through the services. Ever since that occurred, the imperial family has never gone back to Yasukuni Shrine, which suggests that they did not look upon this as something that they approved of. And that's the sort of evidence
But they
that
would
we're
never
looking
say
at.
it.
Of course not, no. That would be an overt statement. So we infer from these gestures. And there are other things where, for example, if you look at the language that the emperor used at the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, most of the attention was focused on Prime Minister Abe's statement, the one that he released on the 14th of August. That was, I think, pleasantly surprising for most people that expected a more revisionist version of history. And yet, for as pleasantly surprised as we were, if you look at what the emperor said at the same time, much more forward-leaning, much more accepting and calling for a clear-eyed view of history. And what would be, I think, not acknowledging the crimes that Japan did in a far more unblinkered way. And that if you look through his statements and the visits that he has made during his reign, that it has been far more of an outreach and a far greater acceptance of the conventional narrative of Japanese behavior and the need for repentance, or whatever the appropriate word is. And all of these, by the way, are very loaded phrases. Every single one of these could be...
Sure, sensitive.
Yes. And so all of those together create this portrait of a man who seems to be far more concerned, greatly concerned about the prospect of Japan perhaps turning its back on that particular historical interpretation.
But you know, it strikes me that the Constitution in the late 40s, put him as a bird in a cage. And he couldn't do politics, and it was a matter of law. And he walks down the street. I don't think he walks down the street.
No, I don't think he
very
walks down
much.
the street.
But as he goes through life, I mean, I think the Japanese people see him as the embodiment of the end of the war, of the defeat of that Constitution, which is a reflection of that defeat.
His father might have been that, because remember, his father was in power then.